In the vast expanse of the galaxy, many species held a deep sense of superiority over humanity. The Xalanar, an advanced, highly intelligent alien race, were among the oldest and most revered. Their doctors had studied the biology of countless life forms across the cosmos, and their expertise was unmatched. Their arrogance, however, was just as grand as their accomplishments. Dr. Vrail, one of the most renowned Xalanar physicians, was known for his ruthless logic and an ego that matched his intellect. A doctor of intergalactic biology, he had examined and dissected the anatomy of species so varied and complex that he considered himself the ultimate authority on life itself. He had never seen a species as primitive as humans, and, frankly, he thought little of them. To him, human biology was an unsophisticated, barely evolved jumble of cells, a species too fragile, too basic, and too flawed to ever pose a serious challenge to the galaxy's advanced civilizations. When a human delegation arrived on the Xalanar research station for a medical consultation, Dr. Vrail was mildly entertained but quickly dismissive. The human volunteer, a young scientist named Dr. Sarah Lancaster, had been chosen to undergo a series of tests. Her species had been slowly expanding their presence in the galactic community, but their biology was a source of ridicule among more established races. Sarah, with her mild nerves and slight apprehension, entered Dr. Vrail's pristine lab. The space was sterile and clean, with advanced equipment designed for studying alien biology. Vrail, already sitting at his terminal, barely spared her a glance. He was busy analyzing data from the latest tests on other species, all of whom, in his eyes, had far superior biological traits. He had heard humans were resilient, yes, but to him, resilience was a sign of weakness, a desperate attempt to survive in an imperfect, fragile body. "You're the human volunteer?" Dr. Vrail asked without even looking up. His voice had the cold, dismissive tone of someone who was sure of their superiority. "Let's get this over with. I'm sure your biology is just as predictable and underwhelming as your kind's history." Sarah was accustomed to the derision. Over the years, humans had been looked down upon by more sophisticated races. Still, her resolve was unwavering. She had volunteered for this test to prove that humans, though different, had the potential to surprise. She took a deep breath and nodded. Dr. Vrail's arrogance was clear as he ran a series of basic diagnostic scans on Sarah. The tests were nothing extraordinary, basic blood work, scans of her internal systems, and genetic sequencing. He glanced at the results and sneered at the data. As far as he was concerned, this was just a formality before he moved on to more interesting subjects. "Simple," he muttered. "Typical mammalian structure, fragile cells, inferior immune response, a linear genetic sequence, with little to no innovation." How quaint. Sarah remained quiet as the alien doctor ran through his usual routine, expecting nothing but standard, unremarkable results. But what Dr. Vrail didn't realize was that he was about to learn a lesson in humility. Dr. Vrail, with his indifference and unshakable confidence, had already made up his mind about human biology. As he stood before the holographic data interface in his sterile lab, the young human volunteer, Dr. Sarah Lancaster, sat in a chair across from him, ready for the next series of tests. The sleek alien equipment around them hummed with a quiet, steady rhythm, casting an almost clinical glow across the room. To Dr. Vrail, this was just another standard procedure, a routine test on a species he considered beneath him. "Let's begin, then," Dr. Vrail said coldly, as he swiped through the data on his interface, preparing to run the scans. His voice was dismissive, as if he was speaking to an underling rather than a fellow scientist. "I'm assuming your kind's biology isn't any more complicated than the average mammalian species. I'll just confirm my suspicions and move on to more interesting subjects." Sarah had heard this before. Despite humanity's recent strides in intergalactic diplomacy, many of the galaxy's more established species still saw humans as an unsophisticated anomaly, a biological blip in the vast cosmic landscape. But Sarah had learned to stay calm and composed, knowing the tests she was about to undergo were more about challenging the status quo than proving anything to an arrogant alien doctor. Dr. Vrale didn't notice the slight narrowing of Sarah's eyes as he began preparing the tests. Instead, he launched into his first procedure, a genetic sequencing scan. He made sure to snicker internally, thinking how simple it would be to map out human DNA. After all, humans were nothing more than a primitive species with predictable biological traits. In a matter of moments, the test results began to appear on the holographic screen in front of him. "Fascinating," he muttered, but the word was laced with sarcasm. The human genome, as he expected, was fairly basic in comparison to many advanced species he had studied. It lacked the complexity of the Jakar or the Visara, two of the galaxy's most biologically sophisticated races. Humans seemed to follow a linear progression, with no major breakthroughs or adaptations that could distinguish them from a myriad of other species in the galaxy. Dr. Vrale clicked his tongue as he observed the data. "As I thought," he murmured, "your species doesn't even possess any particularly unusual genetic markers. Your immune system appears primitive, susceptible to almost every common galactic pathogen." He paused, tapping his long, slender fingers against his console. "It's no surprise. You're weak, biologically speaking, compared to the more evolved species of the galaxy." Sarah's heart pounded a little faster, but she didn't let her frustration show. She'd known the doctor would dismiss her biology as inferior. What he didn't know, however, was that humanity's biological resilience and adaptability weren't immediately apparent under normal tests. Dr. Vrale moved on to the next procedure, a thorough blood analysis. This was a simple test for most species, but Vrale was quick to make a point about how inefficient and slow human healing capabilities were in comparison to the faster-recovering species he'd studied. He took a blood sample from Sarah's arm with a sterile needle, watching closely as the small vial filled with her blood. As the test began, he continued his evaluation aloud, almost as if Sarah weren't even in the room. "Your blood seems to carry an abundance of basic red blood cells," Vrale remarked dismissively. "Nothing spectacular, nothing out of the ordinary. You lack the enhanced, oxygen-efficient blood seen in species like the Koroth, who thrive in low-oxygen environments. Your blood is designed for basic survival, nothing more." As the blood analysis continued, Sarah remained silent, trying to keep her mind focused. She knew the results were coming, and she was eager to see how long it would take for Dr. Vrale to see what he had overlooked. Next, Dr. Vrale scanned her vital signs, taking readings of her heart rate, respiration, and other basic bodily functions. His face remained impassive as he observed the data. Standard heartbeat, standard brainwave activity, nothing extraordinary. As the analysis ran its course, Vrale began to grow more restless, muttering about how underwhelming the results were. "Predictable, ordinary, unimpressive," he said, not even bothering to hide his disdain. "Your species is no different from countless others that live short, insignificant lives in the galaxy. You won't be of much interest in the long run." Sarah could feel the weight of his judgment, but she didn't flinch. She had grown up hearing such things. Humans are weak, humans are primitive. And yet here she was, standing in front of one of the galaxy's most renowned doctors. As the last of the tests concluded, Dr. Vrale glanced up at Sarah, his smug expression never wavering. "Well, I'm finished here," he said, eyes gliding over the final results. "There's nothing remarkable about your biology. Perhaps if your species spent more time advancing your medical science, you might eventually catch up to the more developed species of the galaxy. But until then, your genetics remain unremarkable." However, as Dr. Vrale was about to dismiss her from the examination room, something in the data caught his eye. One of the results, a set of genetic anomalies, pulsed on the holographic display. For a moment, Dr. Vrale paused, staring at the data in disbelief. It didn't make sense. He had seen the same test results thousands of times before, but this was different. Something in Sarah's biology was far beyond what he could explain, and it left him with an unsettling feeling. Dr. Vrail had long prided himself on his ability to read the biology of any species with a single glance. After years of studying countless species, he had come to believe that nothing was truly unpredictable. Everything in biology, from genetics to physiology, followed a logical pattern. And yet, as he stared at the final results of Sarah Lancaster's tests, something nagged at him. The first of the test results had been exactly as he expected. Sarah's blood sample had shown typical human traits, nothing extraordinary. Her heart rate and respiratory function were standard, matching the average levels of countless other species he had studied. But then, as Dr. Vrail went deeper into the data, he found something that didn't quite fit into his neatly ordered scientific box. The genetic sequencing had come back normal, until a small segment of her DNA strand caught his attention. At first, it seemed like a minor anomaly, a small mutation, perhaps an error in the coding. Dr. Vrail quickly ran the sequence through his systems, checking for mistakes or glitches in the scan. But everything seemed intact. It was a genetic marker, one that he couldn't quite place. A sequence of DNA that appeared completely out of sync with any known patterns he had studied. The marker seemed to suggest an unusual degree of adaptability, something that shouldn't exist in a human. Normally, a species like humans would exhibit basic genetic patterns, which had remained largely unchanged for millennia. Humans, Dr. Vrail thought, had no need for such dynamic genetic adaptability. Their biology had always been predictable, stagnant, and primitive. Yet this marker was suggesting something different, a latent, untapped potential within human genetics. It was almost as if humans had the capability to evolve at an accelerated rate, something that was considered a theoretical concept in most species. Species that possessed such markers, Dr. Vrail knew, could undergo drastic, rapid physical and genetic adaptations in response to environmental challenges. He quickly ran the gene cluster analysis again, this time more carefully. As he reviewed the results, he found that there was a significant portion of human DNA that suggested a higher rate of cellular regeneration than expected. It wasn't anything near the extreme regenerative abilities of species like the Vesker, whose cells could regenerate in minutes, but it was still impressive. In fact, it suggested that humans might have an inherent resilience to injury and disease, one that could potentially make them more survivable in harsh, hostile environments than any other species Dr. Vrail had studied. Despite his initial dismissal of human biology, Dr. Vrail couldn't ignore the implications of what he was seeing. He studied the data carefully, adjusting for any possible error, but the results remained the same. There was something unique about human biology that he had completely missed, a biological mechanism that allowed humans to adapt in ways that other species could not. This was no minor anomaly. It was something much more profound. Impossible, Dr. Vrail muttered under his breath. How could this be? How could such a primitive species possess adaptive, genetic coding like this? He leaned forward in his seat, staring intently at the screen. The more he looked, the more he realized that the test results weren't just suggesting a random genetic quirk. They hinted at something far more dangerous, latent evolutionary power. As Dr. Vrail continued his analysis, something else caught his attention. The cellular repair mechanisms in Sarah's blood were significantly faster than what he had anticipated. If exposed to severe trauma, her cells could repair themselves at an accelerated pace. Most species required advanced medical treatments to regenerate lost tissue, but humans seemed to have the natural ability to speed up healing. This was, at its core, a survival trait, one that would allow them to thrive in environments that would kill other species. A tinge of unease began to creep into Dr. Vrail's mind. How could humans, a species seen as weak, fragile, and prone to injury, possess this type of biological weaponry? In all his years of study, he had never encountered anything quite like it. Without hesitation, he decided to test this further. Dr. Vrale initiated a more in-depth examination of Sarah's immune system. His goal was to explore how her body responded to pathogens. After all, the immune systems of many species were uniquely designed to withstand particular environmental conditions. To his surprise, Sarah's immune system was not just reactive, it was hyper-responsive. This suggested that humans didn't just fight off diseases and infections. They could evolve their immune responses in real time, potentially rendering them immune to infections that could wipe out other species in a matter of days. For a moment, Dr. Vrale felt a chill run down his spine. The results were too inconsistent with what he had always known. Human biology, once thought to be fragile and predictable, was beginning to appear much more mysterious, much more potent than he had ever imagined. This was no longer just a case of observing a lesser species. Humans might not just be surviving in a galactic ecosystem, they could be thriving, evolving in ways that other species couldn't even comprehend. Dr. Vrale sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. The results were too significant to ignore. The next steps would be crucial. He was no longer looking at a simple human sample. He was staring at the future of a species capable of evolving at speeds other civilizations could only dream of. Dr. Vrale's initial disbelief deepened with every new test result. The human genome, which he had dismissed as mundane and ordinary, was turning out to be far more complex than he had ever expected. The genetic anomalies he had detected earlier began to stand out more clearly, and his mind raced as he tried to fit them into his understanding of biology. Every new discovery was more perplexing than the last, and with each passing moment, Dr. Vrale found himself increasingly on edge. He sat back in his chair, his sharp alien eyes scanning the data repeatedly. His fingers hovered over the console as the results continued to shift and reorganize themselves before him. He ran through the tests again, not willing to believe what he was seeing. The genetic markers that had first seemed like insignificant errors were now glaring at him, undeniable in their consistency. How could this be? Dr. Vrale thought. How could this fragile, primitive species possess such complexity? He focused again on the latent adaptive traits that had so bewildered him. Human cells, especially their immune response and regenerative capabilities, were unlike anything he had ever seen. His own species, the Zalanar, had evolved with near-perfect biological systems capable of adapting to a vast array of environments. But what he saw now in Sarah's biology was different. It wasn't a simple response to external factors like radiation or toxins. It was something far deeper, something built into their genetic code, something that could allow humanity to rapidly evolve in response to new threats. Dr. Vrale's gaze shifted to a specific portion of Sarah's genetic sequence. The coding was irregular, almost impossible to explain. It wasn't like anything he had encountered in his years of study. Species across the galaxy might possess an ability to adapt, but humans appeared to have a biological fluidity that allowed them to thrive in situations where other species would perish. The idea that such a base species could possess the power to evolve quickly was, in itself, a revolutionary thought. For a brief moment, Dr. Vrale was silent, his mind racing. The idea of human biology evolving in response to the unknown, evolving before it encountered the threat, was a concept that hadn't been seen in the galaxy. It was as if humanity's biological systems were designed to be infinitely adaptable, resilient beyond measure, and capable of pushing beyond any expected limits. Dr. Vrale's thoughts shifted rapidly. He began to recall the countless times humans had been dismissed in galactic circles, often labeled as a primitive species, too limited in scope and too fragile to be a real contender. But what if humans weren't fragile at all? What if their biological resilience was simply masked by their lack of understanding and development? What if their greatest strength lay not in the physical makeup of their bodies, but in their ability to evolve and adapt quickly to their environment? Impossible, Dr. Vrale muttered under his breath, shaking his head. This cannot be real. But the data was clear. Human DNA was more flexible than any other he had encountered. Where other species had rigid evolutionary paths, humans had the potential to move in multiple directions at once, adapting to any number of circumstances with a speed that seemed far beyond their physical makeup. Then something else caught Dr. Vrail's eye, a set of unique markers in the human genome that suggested the presence of a hidden genetic code. These markers were scattered in an odd pattern, almost like a patchwork quilt, suggesting that humans might have the ability to absorb and integrate outside genetic material into their own. If this was true, it meant that humans had the ability to incorporate beneficial traits from other species, adapting to new environments by literally rewriting their genetic code. His hands began to tremble as he ran deeper diagnostic scans. These new findings suggested that humans were not only capable of rapid biological adaptation, but could also surpass natural evolutionary limits through exposure to new and different biological factors. The implications were staggering. Sarah Lancaster, sitting across from him, had remained still throughout the tests, her expression calm despite the alien doctor's shifting mood. She could feel the change in the air. She knew that something was happening, that the once dismissive doctor was beginning to realize what she had always known, that humans were more capable than anyone gave them credit for. Dr. Vrail paused, pressing his fingers to his temples, struggling to process the data. He had thought he understood the limits of biology. He had assumed that the Zalanar, with their near-perfect genetics, were the peak of evolution in the galaxy. They had evolved with stability, designed to thrive in a controlled, highly calculated way. But humanity's biology was not designed with stability. It was designed with flexibility. Humans could survive in chaotic, unpredictable environments, their bodies constantly adjusting and adapting to whatever the universe threw at them. The implications of this discovery were far-reaching. The Zalanar had once believed themselves to be the superior species, having mastered genetics to the point of perfection. But now, for the first time, Dr. Vrail saw something far more dangerous in humanity's biology. A species that could adapt faster than any other. A species that could become a galactic force of unimaginable power. By the stars, Dr. Vrail whispered, almost to himself. Humanity, they've been underestimated. Sarah watched as the doctor absorbed the full weight of what he was seeing. She had never doubted humanity's potential. They were resourceful, yes, but more than that, they were capable of evolving, of becoming greater than anyone thought possible. Dr. Vrail finally looked up at her, his face now devoid of the smug arrogance that had once marked his every move. His eyes were wide with disbelief, but there was something else there too, a grudging respect. "You were right," he said softly. "I have underestimated you. Humanity, your biology, it's unlike anything I've ever seen." "I was wrong?" Dr. Vrail sat motionless in front of the holographic display, his mind reeling from the sheer scope of what he had just uncovered. Every aspect of Sarah Lancaster's biological makeup, every test result, every analysis, had completely shattered his preconceived notions about human biology. He had spent years studying countless species, analyzing their genetics, and yet nothing had prepared him for what humanity's genetic code had to offer. He had believed that his vast knowledge of biology made him untouchable, a master of the science of life. But now, as he sat alone in the sterile lab, Dr. Vrail understood that he had been deeply, profoundly wrong. Humans, a species dismissed for centuries as primitive and fragile, had just revealed a biological complexity that was beyond even his understanding. For the first time in his career, Dr. Vrail was struck by the enormity of his mistake. He had laughed at the idea that humans could possess the kind of adaptive genetic power that other, more advanced species had spent millennia trying to perfect. Yet here, right before him, was a species that didn't just survive, it thrived in ways no one had ever anticipated. He scrolled through the final results again, analyzing the genetic markers and the rapid adaptability of the human immune system. Unlike the rigid genetic sequences of the Xylar or the Vesker, species known for their perfect adaptability, Human genetics were designed for unpredictability. This biological flexibility gave them an edge no other species could match. Humans could evolve faster than any of their galactic counterparts, a phenomenon that Dr. Vrale had believed impossible. As he reread the results, his mind finally accepted the truth. Humanity wasn't fragile. They were resilient beyond measure. They had the capacity to heal, adapt, and thrive in environments that would break any other species. The potential for humanity to evolve into a dominant force in the galaxy was not only possible, it was inevitable. Sarah sat across the room, her calm demeanor unshaken, as if she knew exactly what was happening in Dr. Vrale's mind. It was almost as though she had anticipated this moment. And perhaps, in a way, she had. Humanity had always been underestimated, and now, the galaxy's most powerful doctor had seen firsthand the strength that lay within their biology. Dr. Vrale finally looked up from the data, his expression now one of astonished respect. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly, as if he were speaking to himself. "Humanity, your biology, it's far beyond what I could have ever imagined." Dr. Vrale sat in stunned silence, staring at the results before him, the data flashing across the screen in endless streams. He had never been more humbled in his entire life. The arrogance that had once defined him, the belief that his knowledge of biology surpassed all others, had crumbled in an instant. Now, as the reality of humanity's extraordinary biological potential sank in, the alien doctor's mind shifted. He turned to look at Sarah Lancaster, who sat still, her eyes fixed on the results, with an air of calm that Dr. Vrale couldn't quite fathom. She had known this was coming, hadn't she? While he had scoffed at humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy, she had never wavered in her belief in the power of her species. For the first time, Dr. Vrale realized that humanity was not what he had been taught to believe. "Your species, it's incredible," Dr. Vrale said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed almost foreign to him, as if admitting them was a personal defeat. Yet, there was no denying the truth that was now painfully obvious. Humans had abilities, hidden, latent, and often misunderstood, that defied the very laws of biology as he knew them. The ability to adapt rapidly to changing environments, the cellular regeneration that rivaled the most resilient species in the galaxy, and the immune response that could outpace most advanced civilizations. These were just a few of the factors that made humanity unique. No longer could the Zalanar or any other race look at humans as inferior. Their biology wasn't just simple. It was elegantly complex, designed for survival in the most hostile of conditions. Dr. Vrale leaned back in his chair, his once derisive smile replaced by a look of deep contemplation. The evolutionary edge that humanity possessed would make them a formidable force in the galaxy, perhaps more so than the very species that had dismissed them. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was their adaptability and resilience that made humans a true anomaly in the cosmic tapestry. "You are not just a primitive species, Sarah," Dr. Vrale said, finally meeting her gaze. You are a force to be reckoned with." Dr. Vrale's realization marks a turning point, not only in the story, but in how humanity is perceived by the galaxy. From a species dismissed as weak and primitive, humans are now revealed to possess a hidden biological power that has the potential to reshape the course of intergalactic history. But this is just the beginning. Now, here's where you come in. What do you think this discovery means for the future of humanity? If human biology holds the secret to unlocking unimaginable resilience and adaptability, could they become the galaxy's most dominant species? Will other civilizations finally acknowledge the untapped potential of humans, or will they remain underestimating them? Let's consider the broader picture for a moment. What does it mean for the galactic hierarchy that humanity's biology is capable of rapid evolution and adaptation? Could these traits give them an edge over even the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy? What could humans accomplish if they fully unlocked their genetic potential? Think about the possibilities. The entire galaxy has been underestimating humans for centuries, but now, with this newfound recognition, the tide could be shifting. Will humanity stand out as an underdog that rises to the occasion, or will they fall victim to the prejudices of more advanced species? I want to hear your thoughts. How do you think humanity's surprising biological strengths will impact the future of galactic diplomacy and warfare? Will they continue to surprise the universe, or will their enemies learn how to counter their remarkable resilience? Drop your theories and ideas in the comments below. Share your take on what's next for humanity and how you think the galaxy will react to their newfound power. This is your chance to be a part of this evolving universe, where humans may soon hold the keys to the future. If this story has left you questioning the status quo and wondering what else humanity is capable of, hit that like button and subscribe for more HFY and sci-fi content that explores the hidden powers of humanity. Don't miss out on future stories that challenge the limits of what we know. The galaxy has just begun to realize who humans really are, and this is only the start. Stay tuned for more episodes where humanity's surprising strength takes center stage. You won't want to miss what comes next. Let's reshape the future of the universe together. As Dr. Vrel sat in the aftermath of his revelation, the weight of his earlier arrogance slowly sank in. He had always believed that the galaxy's most powerful civilizations were the ones that had reached the pinnacle of evolutionary perfection. The Zalanar, with their near-perfect genetic stability, had long seen themselves as the zenith of life across the universe. But now, in a simple human subject, Dr. Vrel had witnessed something that not only defied his understanding of biology, but also questioned his entire worldview. Humanity, a species once thought to be fragile, primitive, and insignificant, had demonstrated a biological flexibility and resilience that could rival any galactic power. The adaptive potential embedded deep within their DNA, their ability to rapidly evolve and survive in environments that would cripple even the most advanced species, was not something Dr. Vrel had expected. No, it was unthinkable. As Sarah Lancaster prepared to leave the lab, the look of quiet determination on her face told Dr. Vrel everything he needed to know. She wasn't concerned about proving herself to him. She already knew the truth. Humans were not to be underestimated. They had always been capable of more than anyone, even themselves, had ever realized. But as Sarah's footsteps faded into the distance, a lingering thought kept swirling in Dr. Vrel's mind. If humanity was truly this resilient, what could they become? The galaxy had always viewed humanity as a species at the bottom rung of the evolutionary ladder, clinging to life in the shadow of far older and more established empires. But now, that view was about to change. No longer could humanity be ignored or written off as unremarkable. With the biological resilience they now understood, the latent potential hidden within every human, they were no longer just surviving. They were a species on the verge of evolutionary greatness. For centuries, the galaxy had been ruled by beings who prided themselves on their advanced medical and genetic technologies, species that had refined their biology to perfection. The Jakar, the Vesker, the Xyler, all these civilizations had long believed that their perfection made them superior. But as Dr. Vrel now saw, they had failed to see what made humanity dangerous. Their capacity for growth, their ability to adapt and evolve at a rate that was unlike any other species in the galaxy. This was the true weapon humanity had all along. Dr. Vrel stood up from his desk, the data still flickering on his screen, and walked over to the large viewing window of the lab. Beyond the glass, the dark void of space stretched out in front of him, as endless and unforgiving as ever. He thought about the galaxy's future. What would happen when every species began to realize what humans were capable of? Would they attempt to stifle humanity's rise, fearing what they couldn't understand? Or would they recognize that humanity's biological evolution could be a catalyst for something far greater? Humanity's true potential was still largely untapped. But now, for the first time, The galaxy's most powerful civilizations had been shown the power that lay hidden beneath the surface of human biology. This wasn't just about surviving in a hostile galaxy. It was about thriving, about becoming a force that could challenge the established power structures in ways no one had anticipated. Dr. Vrail's thoughts turned to the future, to the species he had once viewed as insignificant. He could see now that humanity's rise wasn't just inevitable, it was destined. Whether they chose to lead the galaxy with their newfound biological strengths, or simply use their resilience to survive and thrive in the most hostile environments, one thing was clear: humans were no longer the underdog. They were a species that had learned to adapt, to evolve faster and more effectively than any other race in the galaxy. The doctor turned back toward his desk, realizing that his work was far from over. If humanity truly held the power to evolve and adapt as quickly as the data suggested, then he had a responsibility to study them, to unlock their potential, and to ensure that their rise didn't come at the cost of others. In the end, Dr. Vrail couldn't help but feel a sense of awe toward humanity. What had seemed like a weak, unremarkable species had proven that their greatest strength lay not in their physical form or their technological prowess, but in their unpredictable resilience and their capacity to change, to adapt, and to ultimately shape their own future. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again, and perhaps neither would Dr. Vrail.